Alright guys, let's put some buttons in. So we need this piece, soldering iron, some solder, and the bottom shell that we just did in the last video. So this is where you can have some freedom of, kind of self-expression on how you do this. But basically, you can remember this sits in there like that. And the reason why I wired them the way I did, where I routed the wires, is that these wires need to be over here, this wire needs to be over here. We also need to carry a black wire from this side to this side. So I'll show that. That's the way I do it. Not everybody does it that way. Some people just wire two black wires, send one to the green side and one to the red side, and that's perfectly valid. So I just grab an extra length of wire for that. It all depends on how you like to do it. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, make sure everything's kind of in a good workspace, and we'll get going. So like I said, I like to be able to flip the board out just for maintenance, because these switches, they're not infinite, they break. They're pretty damn easy to break too. They only click for so many thousand clicks, and then they die. So I like to just give myself a little bit of room to work with here, and then I clip it, get rid of this extra bit of wire, and then the same thing over here. A little bit of room to work with, clip it. You can always hide the wire in there later. This black wire, since we're going to be carrying it over, I like to strip it first. Strip it just a little bit longer than you're really going to need. Don't trim that one up. Take that second wire that you grabbed. It could be black, it could be another wire to signify that you're carrying another signal over. The color of the wires don't matter. The wire being wired in the right location is what matters. So just splice those together, and I'm going to go ahead and just pull off the very ends of these. You need about a 1/4 inch ish, somewhere between 1/8 and 1/4 on these, for them to work fine. And then that's really all you need. I won't trim the end of this one yet because I don't really know how that's going to go. So for this part, we need to tin these legs. So I'd like to make them bent down a little bit. Get our soldering iron out and solder. For me, it's easier if I push this board to the side for now and do this where this board is kind of facing that way. And you want to heat up the leg that you're going to be soldering to. So the leg gets hot, and then you can just feed solder into it, and you're left with a nice little shiny bubble on there. Be careful around the hot glue, because it'll stink something fierce. And again, so we just heat the leg up here, and then flow some solder into it, and you'll get a nice little bead on the leg. Yeah, really couldn't ask for much more there. Keep your soldering iron on, you'll need it. So you can do this wiring kind of the same way. Remember that it's going to sit like this. And you can arrange the wiring however you want. This is just kind of like the most standard one. So for this, I like to take the tweezers here, and I like to leave the inside one for the ground on both sides, and then the not ground basically on the outsides, the actual lead coming from the button. So here I just take the tweezers, bring it into this, hold it down until the solder flows, and then let it set, and it's that simple. So on this side, I'll start with the ground, which I said previously a moment ago that I like to use the middle, and the reason I like to use the middle will be apparent in just a minute. So just bring the wires to the joint, heat it up so that the solder flows all around the wire and the joint. Probably making this look easy. After you do it a couple of times, it gets easier. So like I said, practicing on junk electronics or stuff you would throw away anyway, or like your kids' books, that have like the little batteries in them and the little touch switches. Those are good for short circuiting and, you know, messing around with, you know, anything you were going to throw away that somebody else couldn't use, or, you know, something that's somewhat broken. So for the moment, this button would work, but this one wouldn't if we were to hook everything back up. And that's because I haven't carried over the ground. So what I like to do here is these wires can actually, the legs can be bent down the rest of the way. For the ones that you haven't wired yet, bend the leg, not the wire, so you don't accidentally like break something. Yeah, okay. And then what I like to do here is, like I said, you got to stay away from these two spots, or you'll end up with a chat port issues. So I just like to go above it here. And the way that I help keep that easy is I just hit it with a dot of glue on both sides. And use the same trick where you like moisten your finger with some water, or, you know, lick your finger, or whatever you're comfortable with. You want to wait a few seconds though, because you could burn your finger on the hot glue. That's not going to get in the way because it's lifted up a bit, and then we just, you know, clear those little tails of glue out of the way. And that's really easy to work around for another modder if they need to get in and do some repairs. So now I know that I'm going to give it a little bit of a slack. We call those like service loops. And then I'm just going to clip it. So I was pretty close as far as I guess on wiring. I like to do it this way. It's just me. And then that way, if I need to service something, I can just kind of take one side off or whatever. It makes it easier for me to just desolder these. I don't cover these switches in glue. Or I can desolder them from the board, or just clip them and replace the wiring. It's all rather simple once you've got the hang of it. So then here on this side, we just repeat what we did over before. Heat the solder, set the wire. You actually don't need the soldering iron for a little bit now until you put the rumbles back in. So you said bend all these leads down if you want to be. Alrighty, so my battery actually died while I was doing that last part. But essentially, what I wanted to show you in that section was what you can do with this here is just place a little glue down in there to anchor the wires in, so that if for some reason when you're working on this you accidentally pull it, it's not going to pull the solder joints out. It's just going to tug on the wires. So I also mentioned that if you were changing your thumbsticks at this point, you could just swap these back on. Now if you wanted to just do it before, and you were only changing the thumbsticks perhaps for some battle beavers like I had mentioned, you could have done that then too, but this just gets some standard sticks. They're keyed, they only go on one way. It's really not all that difficult. When you are putting this back together, it helps that you index kind of off these battery clips so that they go in there. The back side will seat cleanly. The front side you might have to push the triggers down on both sides before you can push this in. If you look very closely, see if I can get the camera to, there's these little holes or slots. You just want to make sure that they line up the whole way through. And they do. So now your triggers operate normally. And really you can actually button this thing up. Before you do that, you want to, if you have a chat adapter, get that, so you'll need it in a moment. But basically we're just kind of working backwards now beyond that. So and obviously this wouldn't be fun without a missed step. There's two screws that you have to put in here, and then, you know, the mirror on the other side. These are those Torx 6 screws that we took off, you know, back in one of the earlier videos. The reason why this matters is whenever you're pushing on The controller, the sticks, you don't want the boards flexing apart, breaking connection, or anything like that. I've seen some people send in controllers to me for repair that they tried to mod themselves and didn't really have luck, and they were missing those screws, and I had to go out and get some from a store. So again, just index off of those battery clips, get the bottom of the seat, hit the triggers in, push down. Triggers work, these work, all these face buttons are fine, sticks work. Don't get too alarmed if you're doing this and you stick to the side, because the face plate actually limits the range of motion for this. So then you take this and it just slides over the cover. You just want to make sure everything's sitting flush. And at this point, I would take one of your Torx security screws. I usually start with this middle one, put it in. And drive that in until it's nice and snug. You don't have to go crazy. If you're swapping the plastic pieces out on here, expect this to have a harder time going in than you think it would need. Simply because you're actually cutting the threads in the plastic for the first time, and it's going to take more force. So, and also be careful with it. Sorry for the noise, my washing machine's running. Okay, so at this point, if you have a chat adapter, you want to check this out, make sure there's no problems. A surefire way to know that you've got a problem is if you're looking at it straight on. Let me see if I can get a straight on angle. You will see part of a circuit board either on the top or the bottom, one way or the other. This is great alignment right here. I can tell you right now that that's going to fit. If you're using a colored bottom shell, you may need to widen this little notch. Sometimes they don't fit great. If you're doing that, you can do it with an X-Acto knife. Just be very careful. I like to tape it off with some kind of thick tape, maybe duct tape or electrical tape while I'm doing that. Just be careful. If you have a decent squared off file, you can also use a file to do that, or you can just cut that little tab off of your you can just cut the little tab off of the chat adapter. It's not that big of a deal either. So next, you just put the rest of these screws back in. I have a controller that you could put batteries in and it would work. If you wanted to test it, now would be the time. It's pretty good. Everything functions as it should, and then you have two clicky buttons on the bottom. Now, we'll cover trigger stops in a moment. Thanks, guys.